So
Ooh.
I might end up in the north, which I'm now realizing some things, which I'll probably talk about in the video, that I have taken on living in the Bible Belt.
No.
That I'm now realizing, oh, that's not God, that's religion. And I love Georgia, but now I'm kind of like, maybe I need to go north for a little while. Get away. So possibly.
All right. I guess we are live now. The indicator that it was supposed to tell me we're live was not doing so properly or faithfully, so I had it removed. Yeah, I want to
excommunicated it.
I want to talk about I want to talk about religious trauma tonight. And where do I start? There's at least three things I want to say. That the meme that I sent you was sent to me by my sister this morning. And we have this ongoing conversation. And when I mean ongoing, I mean like over years, about the effects of our religious upbringing on our adult life. And it's frankly more negative than positive. And I'm troubled at when I go by a billboard that says Jesus is the answer, or you're having trouble in your life, Jesus has peace. I know people that have been around Jesus all their life and it's not doing anything for them, or they still have very serious problems that's not helping with. So I think there's something that we're missing. I'd said before once to Nick and maybe to some other people, I think there's almost like two Jesus. There's a Jesus of no responsibility, like ideology, sit back and let him do it all. And then there's a Jesus that encourages you to take responsibility. And I think that's the one that we're supposed to be following. So I had a conversation recently with Paula, and the content isn't that important other than that it contained complaints, like little kind of simple complaints about, I wish you would stop doing this, and you have a bad habit of doing this kind of discussion, right? And when I sat down to have the conversation, I knew what we were going to talk about, and I was smiling, and we had a good conversation. Nobody yelled, nobody fought, and we analyzed potential causes and solutions, and we ended the conversation. The conversation developed into other things, but we ended that portion of the conversation on an upbeat note with a feeling of resolution, that kind of thing. That sounds very simple, but it seems to me to be a rarity that people know how to sit and have a talk about simple things, especially when it may bruise the ego. And it makes me wonder why this is. And so sometimes we watch reality TV shows, something like Married at First Sight, something like that, just for fun. And we kind of like to use it as a means of self-therapy. Like, what is this couple doing wrong here? Why are they fighting here? What are they doing wrong here? And what could be, I just saw one of my coworkers. And that's right. Y'all may not know this, but That's my coworker back there behind Nick. We go way back. We work at the same company. We found this out recently. So why is the people can't have? So we analyze these conversations other people have to see what's going wrong, what's going right, and it turns out that when I look at my own past, I've been a pastor and several times, educated in theology and raised in a Christian home, but I found myself in a situation where there was this person in my life that I could not communicate with. Absolutely did not have the skill set to do that. So pause on that. And then I got sent, there's somebody sending me, I get sent emails all the time. Hey, check out this message from my pastor. I think he's a Calvinist. What do you think? Right. So I listened to one of these today, and it was absolute ideological propaganda. And I'm trying to think, there's certain people in my life, like I know somebody who cannot communicate functionally with someone with whom they disagree. Like with specifically like with their granddaughter in the case that I'm thinking of. And I know somebody who cannot take constructive criticism at all without becoming completely nihilistic when it happens. And I know, so I'm thinking, as I'm listening to this sermon, I'm thinking, would it help these people be able to talk to their husband better? Would it help them be able to talk to their granddaughter better? Would it help them be able to handle constructive criticism better? Would it help them do that? Somebody recently recommended a book to me by Amir Sephardi on Revelation Revealed, and I'm in chapter 5, and I had to text them back, and I had to ask them, what is the quality of this book that justified recommending it? Because I don't know what that is. I haven't found it yet, and I'm in chapter 5. Is it going to come later? And so far, it's just been standard dispensational ideology, and I'm like, does this help you know how to talk to your granddaughter better? Does this help you know how to have a functional communication within your marriage and keep it together? Does this help you? Those kinds of things. It's jam-packed with all these beliefs, but when I think of the actual problems that are in the people's lives that are sending me this material to listen to, none of the content helps them with any of the things that they need help with. And after my own divorce, I spent a lot of time like, hey, I am infirmed. I have an inability to do a few things, and everything that I am going to consume, it's going to be because it can help me do something better that I do or be something better that I cannot do or be now. And pumping your head full of propositional ideology doesn't do it. But I've had a lifetime of that happening to me in the church, as have other people. And so when this got sent to me, in addition to these things, the ineffectiveness of propositional Christianity to produce a transformed functional person, as opposed to dysfunction, right? A transformed functional person. It is not there. So I will share my screen just for a second, and we will look at this thing for people in the audience to know what has prompted this discussion tonight. We are looking at 6 things that contribute to religious trauma. I have no idea where this originally came from, but the first one is spiritual spaces that don't make a space for disagreement or questions. The second one is faith communities that motivate primarily with fear. Third one, being trained to ignore or distrust our bodies, thoughts, and instincts. And that you could put phenomenology in there with like the phenomenon, like your 5 senses. What are your 5 senses telling you? What are your emotions telling you? The fourth one, when a church or organization prevents us from getting help from outside of the system. The fifth one, when a community requires you to share beliefs or you lose family and friends. Seen that, been there. And the sixth one is brainwashing and religious indoctrination. And you could call this religious dogmatism, instruction in religious dogmatism. I saw a Facebook post today by somebody on Soteriology 101 that referred to this as catechizing your children. That's what they referred to it as. And I see it as brainwashing and religious indoctrination. What you're doing is you're putting a bunch of ideas in people's heads that they are supposed to trump what they actually see, touch, taste, feel, and smell. They're supposed to elevate this ideology over that and take it as the truth. And what that winds up happening is you wind up becoming disconnected from reality, disconnected from people. And when if meaning is connections that have value, you now have broken connections, and the ideology is causing the break in connectivity, and you have less meaning in your life because of these things that are supposed to bring you meaning. And then, the mental health crisis, meaning crisis, et cetera, and so forth. That's my intro. That's where my thoughts are today. And the floor, whoever else has something to say.
Yeah, I think catechism is just euphemism for brainwashing.
Absolutely.
Just like Planned Parenthood.
Children.
Yeah, just like Planned Parenthood is euphemism for infant murder or something like that. It's the exact opposite, but it's catechism is intuitively what I think it means is to instruct somebody into the universalization of something, right? Is that what catechism means?
I don't know. I have to look it up.
Yeah, I don't know either, but really what the catechism is going to teach you in any of these Christian-y paradigmatic ways is going to be not a universalization of concepts, but a separation how to conform to an in-group at the expense of an open understanding of things. It's the exact opposite.
So Seraphim says catechism is propositional indoctrination. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. But I'm interested in the word too, because I'm also thinking like you're thinking of cat as in universal, kataholos, like Acts 9:36. I'm thinking of maybe cataphatic, like the positive descriptions of what God would be. Maybe I'm curious about the etymology of it. Let's see. Anyway, book of instruction.
Hey, Kevin, guys,
go ahead.
If you want to get a handle on catechism, I think it might be good to just Google up Catholicism and read the catechism. It might give us an idea of what they're about. What I see is exactly what I believe Seraphim was saying, that it's a propositional first layer. Here's what you do. Here's what we're about, and that's it. There's nothing really too special about it.
That's what it is. I'm just curious about why that word, and it seems to be that it's from the word catechine, which means to resound. In other words, to parrot something back, to be able to repeat with fidelity the things that you're supposed to know.
Okay, so maybe it's not euphemism for brainwashing. Maybe it literally means brainwashing. Because to brainwash somebody is to just like get them to repeat the thing, the behavior, the utterance that you want them to repeat. So maybe it's not euphemism at all. Maybe it's just it means exactly what it says, which is brainwashing.
Yep. Yeah. We have somebody in the chat right now who's talking about predestination, and they have been brainwashed or catechized with Augustinian predestination, not with biblical predestination. And they think it's a binary thing, like you either do or don't believe in predestination. They've been brainwashed into thinking what it is. Whereas in scripture, predestination is not anything like what Augustine said it was. So yeah, like Roberta said, we do have in the chat here, we do have a video on predestination. So the person calling themselves NM, we ask you to go ahead and go watch that. Predestination, it's nothing like you were told. Go watch that when you get a chance. So we're here on, and that's an example. It's a good example of somebody who is identified with a set of propositions, and they have no wisdom in how to interact with people in a good faith way. All they know how to do is push their propositions.
Well, I think the simple questions here are who is being predestined and what are they being predestined to?
Yes.
And those are two variables that give you thousands of possibilities.
Yeah. So we go into the inductive method and start answering those questions in the text, and we don't bring a doctrine to the text. A repeated doctrine from starting with Augustine being resounded back down all the way down.
I had a thought on this, back to the 6 cartoons or the 6 images you showed.
Yeah.
But I don't want to derail the catechism conversation.
No, that's fine. I think we've identified what a catechism is.
Derail ahead. Okay. Well, it seems to me when I look at all 6 of these points, they seem to all kind of relate to something I see in 1 Timothy chapter 4. And it just seems that in 1 Timothy chapter 4, you read, something that sounds religious, you
Uh-huh.
know, like forbidding to marry, commanding to abstain from meats. Okay. And forbidding to marry, you think, going to live in a cave somewhere and not eat meat, be vegetarian, sleep on a bed of nails, and eat bread and water.
Like
and
extreme asceticism.
yeah, and asceticism, and be really, really spiritual. But here, this is described as doctrines of devils, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting. It's kind of the opposite of what it might seem in a common view, that oh, this is really spiritual, getting closer to God. But it's kind of the opposite here. And verse 4, every creature of God is good and nothing to be refused. So it's interesting that it seems that in those 6 points, there is a divergence away from the real truth that is there in what Jesus taught, the truth of God. And that makes me think of a divergence away from the original purpose. And, we could look at institutions that are created for one purpose, and then they gradually get away from it, like a college that starts out as a Bible college, and then they go more and more secular, just as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that religion in general seems to, at least in some cases, have diverged and gotten off the path when it comes to these 6 areas.
I think that you hit on something that I think deserves attention, which is, you said colleges start off like Harvard and Yale. They started off as Christian colleges, as seminaries, and they tend to get more secular. Well, the idea that there's a difference between secular and sacred, I think, is a problem. There is reality. And if God is real, then exploration of God should be exploration of reality. But when the recognition happens that propositional Christianity takes you away from reality, those who are interested in studying reality find that they are having to leave propositional Christianity in order to do that.
Yep.
And because they don't further disambiguate and distinguish that, they think they're leaving all of Christianity, that all of Christianity has to be left in order to study reality, which should not be the case.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And there's kind of a false dichotomy, it seems, between the natural and the supernatural. In a sense, if you think about it, what's more natural than God? If he naturally exists, is self-existent without anybody else creating him. And what's more artificial than nature if it was created by God, just like man creates a city or a car, And so I think this separation between supernatural.
Why is a house any less natural than a beaver dam?
Exactly. So I think this maybe under the guise or the mistaken motive of trying to glorify God, set him apart from reality to such an extent that he's crippled, like he's so perfect he can never change, because to change, any change from perfection is less than perfect. And then we say God can't change, and Augustine said God in Genesis did not even talk, it was an angel. So, and then God can't act, because if he can't talk, the same reasoning would prevent him from doing anything. So it looks like and maybe trying to glorify God by setting him so above reality, we've crippled him. And that is like the foundation. And if you build on that, instead of what the Bible says about God, if you build on this philosophical notion, your foundation is bad. So whatever you build on it seems to be questionable at best.
Yeah, like the God of theology is not the God of the Bible or the God of nature.
Yeah.
I
And
think
I
the
saw,
descriptions of God by people like, say, Heraclitus and Alfred North Whitehead are
Mhm.
much more biblical than the God of theology.
and actually the Yale head of Department of Religious Studies at Yale,
Yeah.
Christine Hayes, said that when she's teaching Old Testament to her students, they say, no, you're wrong. That's not God. And, she's telling them what the Bible in the Old Testament says about God.
Here's what it says.
Yeah. And they say, no. And she said, their concept of God does not come from the Bible. It comes from Western philosophy.
Yeah.
There's a short video on that of her saying that. So back to anyway, those
Yeah.
are some thoughts.
Yeah. Very interesting.
And there's another one that comes to mind in I think, where is it? But this may be out of context, but I'm going to mention it anyway.
Okay.
So you can always tell me, Joe, you're a heretic. But in
This
2
is a
Timothy
heretic.
3:5, it mentions having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. So there should be some power. And I thought of that when you mentioned, Kevin, the transformed lives. People like, you believe a set of propositions, and where's the power?
Yeah, where's the power? Where is the transformed life? Just like John Vervaeke asked, don't tell me what you think is true. Show me how it has transformed you.
Yeah, well, the important part in that verse for me, the part that stands out is the word form,
Yeah.
having a form of godliness. So is it a conforming? Is it a reforming? Is it a transforming? So based on the context, it sounds like it's something that's like ill-formed or
It's
something like that.
performing is what it is.
Yeah, performing is a good one too.
Oh.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
A form.
Yep.
Yeah. I think one thing that I'm going through right now is that church, as we practice it today, makes me feel like I'm trying to make my life match a checklist.
Ah.
And I feel very much like I'm pretending to be a certain kind of person instead of actually having the wisdom to know how to actually be and embody that person. And
Yeah.
it's really frustrating because people who are subscribed to that version of Christianity, it's not something that you can explain to them. Like, they think, oh, well, I'm going to church and I'm going to Bible study and I have my quiet time. I'm like checking all these things off. So like I'm doing the thing. But like Kevin said, they don't know how to practically become a better version of themselves, become a better person. And that's something that I'm wrestling with, is like, why, like what's going on here where the people who seem to think they're doing the thing, I don't think, they don't seem to have any transformative capacity. And Joe said earlier, having a form of godliness and denying the power thereof, and talking about there's supposed to be some power there. And lately, I've just been feeling very disempowered. And I think it's because I've been trying to subscribe to religion instead of actually becoming like Christ, actually embodying his character and his likeness. And it's just so frustrating, and it's hard to explain to people who don't get it. And people think that you're falling away from the faith if you, like, I stopped going to church this year because I feel like I'm not becoming anything. I'm just checking boxes and following the rules. And I'm starting to feel like I can't separate tradition and culture and societal expectations from what God is actually calling us to. And I feel like I can't go back to church until I know who I am in Christ, apart from all that tradition and culture and societal expectations. And yeah, so I'm wayward right now, I guess.
You're not wayward at all. See, that's the transition from stage 3 to stage 4 of growth is perceived as waywardness.
Yeah.
By those with a stage 3 and lower mindset. Whereas, I I was in a conversation with somebody not long ago where my wife and I had coffee with this woman, and we acknowledged that we're perceived as straying from the faith, but our experience is being closer to God than we've ever been. And the propositional church didn't help get us there.
I was just thinking they said Jesus was
Glutton and a wine bibber.
and operating under the power of the devil.
Yeah, he has the devil.
Yeah.
Say we not well, yea, he has the devil. So these specific things, spiritual, like the first one, spiritual spaces that don't make space for disagreement or questions. Or any of the others. Say again.
Come, let us reason together. It comes to my mind from
Isaiah 1:18. Yeah.
Yeah. Like God doesn't say, shut up. I mean, maybe if needed, he would, but I like that. Let us reason together.
So what pops into my head is what are we trying to do when we come together with other Christians? Are we trying to arrive at proper conclusions, proper semantically disambiguated propositional conclusions, or are we trying to interface with Scripture and each other in a way that results in us being better than we were before? And if we are being different, then what are we aiming at so that we can evaluate whether or not it's better or worse?
Hey, Kevin, you know what I learned a lot, should I say, that got me to think about your channel back in the day? And this all ties to catechism. It just ties to religion and just period.
Yeah.
Presuppositions are building blocks in every category. It doesn't have to be religion.
Yeah, in every domain. Yeah.
In every domain, presuppositions are these building blocks. And when I was looking up presupposition, I came across persuading. And when you look at the definition of persuading, it's literally persuading someone to believe a certain way to think or do something. I'm kind of paraphrasing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we get together with Christians, the first thing that I try to think about is what possible false presuppositions. Let's just back up, because good presuppositions and bad presuppositions exist. And the false presuppositions take a hold of a lot of building blocks in religion today. And so when you sent that little, that little graphic out, I was thinking false presuppositions turn any religion into a self-ideology.
Yeah.
And so I guess go ahead.
I kind of want to push back on that a little bit. I think even ideological possession does not have to be false conclusions. Ideological possession can be of more or less true conclusions or irrefutable conclusions based on the known knowledge. And it's not the conclusions themselves, it's the person's relationship to them. Are you holding the conclusions in having mode And are you being rivalrously moralistic with those conclusions? Or are you like you're having them, or are you being with them like they're there and they're not you? You're being with them in a way that affords transformation for yourself and for other people in a loving way.
Right.
It's a
And what-
completely different thing. So whether or not the conclusions are true or false, you could actually take false conclusions and use them in a good way. You know, you could use a story, you could use a Disney movie that's not true per se, but it tells a story, and you can use that kind of as a model of interaction with somebody else to afford and facilitate some kind of dynamically transformative relationship with somebody else.
Could I try and tie exactly what Billy was saying and exactly what you were saying together into one thing?
Yeah.
So Billy, you'll be happy to know this. One of my favorite philosophers who Kevin gave a shout out to or invoked earlier, Alfred North Whitehead, he gives a definition of philosophy that he says philosophy is the search for presuppositions. He says to philosophize, to do philosophy, is to actively search for presuppositions. So that's interesting.
Mhm.
And then what Kevin said was ideological possession has something to do with a person's relationship to the conclusions that they might have. And what you were saying was that the conclusions that somebody has have to do with their presuppositions.
Correct.
Right? So their
Correct.
presuppositions will a lot of the time determine what their conclusions are. So the way I want to tie what you were saying with what Kevin was saying together is that ideological possession is also the relationship that one has to their presuppositions. So somebody who's coming to correct conclusions, part of the issue with that, with the ideological possession, is that they might be completely ignorant and know nothing about the presuppositions that they have to hold in order to get them to those correct
Yes.
conclusions.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Hence the ideological possession, because the presupposition is what it's what takes primacy over what conclusions one even has access to coming to. Presuppositions also hold the parameters of the questions that someone's even allowed to ask.
Yep.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which is why Whitehead says that philosophy, the love of wisdom, is the search for presuppositions.
So you want
Because
to bring those into the light so you know what they are.
you want to have a proper relationship to them.
So in the military, when we're doing MDMP, military decision making, there's a huge emphasis on facts and assumptions, and you have to enumerate all of those. And what you inevitably find out as you go through that process is that there are a lot of things you're thinking of as fact that you find out to be assumptions. And then your assumptions either need to be validated or invalidated or remain as assumptions. And so when you're going into a situation, you would say something like, we're going to go over this hill. We don't know if the enemy is over there. And we think there's a battalion of enemy over there, but that is an assumption. There could be 2, there could be 0. And so you know that's an assumption going in. And so you're not attaching yourself to it. Even if it's a fact, you shouldn't attach yourself to it emotionally. But you don't want to give things non-epistemically warranted confidence margins. And so knowing what those assumptions are, knowing what those presuppositions are. So another way to do this would be, there's like a collection of skills that can help with this, and you might call it first principles thinking, which is a skill set that you can dance with. And if you're doing first principles thinking, you're going to be asking why. In the book Super Thinking, the author talks about asking the 5 whys, but it's not just why. but you ask why this, and then you get an answer, and then why that. You get an answer, why that. You get all the way back down to where you don't have any more whys to ask. And then once you're at the place where you can't answer the question, maybe that's where your presupposition lies. Maybe that's where your assumption is, or maybe that's where an axiom has to be, something like that.
Do you know what my middle name is?
Your middle name is Joshua, yeah?
No, Michael Joshua Joseph is my first name. Do you know what my middle name is?
No,
And why but?
I didn't. I don't know if I understood that.
Yeah, and why but? Because it's my middle name. And why and but?
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
You want
Yeah.
to comment on that a little further?
Yeah, because I mean, like the first week I was on, Nick asked me a question. I couldn't really answer it because every time I give somebody asks me a what, I have to give a why.
Yep.
I have to give an explanation. And like at the beginning, you gave two options. I was going to say I disagreed with your presuppositions because I think you gave two options. It's either this or that. And sometimes it's not either or, it's and A and B. It's not either A or B. And yeah, that's how I always try to think. It's just become programmed. So you have to go into that. It's like you call that first principles thinking, don't you? Or whatever you call it.
Yeah. Yeah. So those questions, very helpful.
I think there's a third option. You said either Jesus does everything or we do everything. Is there another option to that presupposition?
Say again, what are those two options?
Either Jesus is the one who has to do everything in order for us to, we're either leaving everything up to Jesus. He's the one who solves all the problems, or we have to.
That wasn't really meant to be an exhaustive delineation. It's more or less an observation of the attitudes toward Jesus that I find. There seems to be an attitude of the Jesus to whom I can abdicate all responsibility, and then the Jesus that encourages me to take responsibility.
I think within Protestantism, within the Protestant church, you've experienced that, or just in general?
Well, I've never been Protestant. I've always been Baptist in my coming up. So I guess, but also just generally in Americana, regardless of whether or not people are Protestant or Catholic or neither of those. You just like on T-shirts or during a praise and worship service or the way people pray, it's like people are outsourcing all of the agency to God. And there's this saying that says, pray like it all depends on God and act like it all depends on you. Maybe there's something like that there's a little wisdom there.
Yeah, because when I use Protestant, I meant in the general term, but it's a binary thing.
Well, I got this book on my website called Baptists Aren't Protestants, because we were never part of the Catholic Church. Baptists weren't, and so it's a little bit of an issue with me. I'm ideologically possessed in that arena still.
Yeah, from the Anabaptist to
right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I understand the binary issue. But I think I said I'm not church. I'm a Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, any kind of religious system, Muslim, none of them. So I have no religious background, and my actual involvement with the church was very limited as well. But I have noticed that binary aspect, and I think there are more nuances as well, and I think there are other options that could be put on the table.
Yeah, other options. I think of those two, it's all up to God or it's all up to me. Those are two opposite ends of a spectrum. And what if some things depend on God, other things depend on you? Maybe some things are a partnership, and it takes two to tango.
So can I read a question and answer? that I got today. Speaking of God, somebody asked me today in a message, they said, does God bless Christians financially? I just wanted your thoughts. I'm thinking about putting it on my wall, like a Facebook wall. A lot of people think God does. So I said, okay, here's my answer. This is a little lengthy, but here we go. My perspective is that the law of sowing and reaping applies to everyone. Galatians 6, I don't see any evidence that someone gets financially blessed just for being a Christian. I know lots of professing Christians who are profoundly serious about their faith who died having lived their whole life paycheck to paycheck. If a person wants financial abundance, I think they can apply the principle of responsibility to their life that we learn from Jesus, and that will bring forth fruit. Lost people often do this better than saved people, but sowing and reaping is a universal law and applies to anyone. There's also something to be said for synchronicities that can be brought about through the spoken word. Whether a person is writing down goals and looking at them, or chanting certain things in a Buddhist monastery, or following Carnegie or Tony Robbins or Zig Ziglar, or praying, etc., a person can use the spoken and written word to increase the likelihood of desired outcomes. There's scientific evidence for this. See the work of Dr. Kirby Surprise, that is not a joke, that's his real name, on the issue of synchronicities. If you see God in the way that Alfred North Whitehead describes God, process theology, then the act of working to bring about financial success and God blessing you are one and the same. So the resolution of this question really matters, the resolution at which it's asked, like how well it's articulated. If you're asking me if I believe more or less magical blessing with no prehension or seeds planted, etc., then no. Personally understanding God through the lens of, say, Jordan Peterson led me to take actions which doubled my own income. So is that a blessing? Sure. Was it magical and unexplainable? No. God is fractal, and the processes of how God works extends out to all things. One must get into attunement with that flow of the way, and then they can facilitate the means by which God blesses.
Now, Kevin, I was with you. I was in full agreement right up until the end.
Yep.
The part where I think somewhere in there you kind of said that, you have to apply the law to see that outcome. And I think that that's not always necessarily the case in terms of blessing, whether that be financial or any other kind of blessing.
But
like,
okay, I'll let you finish.
Yeah, like I think about, and I think there is, the law of sowing and reaping that can be applied by anybody, whether they're a Christian or not a Christian. But then there are also instances where God provides, and it's not your work or your effort or your application of a law. Now, I think that I'm going to speak personally about my life, that God has provided a lot of things for me, like manna from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm realizing now in my journey, like as a Christian, is that it's time for me to mature to the point where I'm applying the laws that he's given us to my life. Like, it's good that God can provide those blessings, and give things out of the clear blue sky that you didn't expect it. And I have really experienced that truly.
As have I, yes.
Yeah, but I think that God wants us to live by principles and not by miracles. But I think there's a tension in that, because when you become dependent on the principles, it's like, then is your faith in the principle or is your faith in God? And where is your faith when
why
the
are they separate?
Fails you?
Why is any process separate from God?
What do you mean by that?
So if God is, if you think of process theology, like sowing and reaping, for example, if that is the way things are in God's creation, then getting in attunement with that aspect of God's creation is akin to getting in attunement with God himself.
I can agree with that, but now what's coming to my mind is that verse, and I can't fully remember the context, so I don't know if it's relevant, but the verse that talks about reaping where you haven't sown. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it's both. And I don't see it as you have to, it's wise to apply the principles to your life, but I think that there's also room for God to do things apart from your application of wisdom and principles.
Yeah, I agree with
But
that. I
I
totally
don't
agree
think
with
God
that.
wants us to live that way necessarily.
Right. So can God not do something like that? Of course, there's no restrictions on what God can and can't do, but the mechanisms by which God operates, if you look at people, regardless of whether or not they are saved or claim to be saved, there is a very direct correlation between the amount of effort versus with their financial success. There almost always is. So you might have a George Mueller miracle type answered prayer every once in a while. I mean, I know people, I'm thinking of somebody right now who lives month to month on a fixed income and doesn't do very well. And every once in a while, they get these kind of miracle occurrences where they come across a bunch of money or somebody helps them do something like that. But they're still not really doing much better than they typically do for the level of effort that they're putting out.
Yeah, and I think there's drawbacks to both, because if you're living on miracles, then you're not maturing because you're not learning the wisdom that God has given us in scripture and applying that wisdom to your life.
Yeah.
But I feel like if everything in your mind is, I have to apply this principle to produce an outcome, what does that do to your faith when everything is dependent on your correct application of
Well, how do you define faith though?
Yeah,
Because
I think
I've said this before, like one person says faith, I believe in God, so I'm going to sit on the couch and let him do something for me, or I believe in God, so I'm going to get up off my butt and obey him and work with my hands and give to them that need, stuff like that. I mean, where's the faith? How does that faith work?
I think I can help turn up the resolution just a hair here.
Yeah.
At least I want to try to. So what I'm hearing is something like, so in a general way, there's Bible verses that will say something or mean something to the effect of God is working in the world in all of these different ways. It's God is the way in which reality or a salience landscape unfolds itself in front of an individual. And then there's verses in like Philippians 2 or Philippians 3, which is like, for it's God that worketh in you, both to do and will of his good pleasure, which is what I think I hear Kevin emphasizing more, where it's God that worketh in you, in the sense where there has to be an initiative or an impetus towards a self-understood or a self-effort. I know Christians have like a hard time with words like work and effort and things like that, but just forgive me the language for a second, but some kind of reflexive cognitive agency at like, okay, well, what is internally, what is standing out in front of me? How is God working like in unfolding things in front of me in terms of circumstances?
Yep.
And how am I internally responding and foregrounding those certain things and orienting my attention, right? That's God working in you, both to do and will of his good pleasure. So that's where the process of the whole thing, it's like God is working outside of you while simultaneously working in you and with you. And it's the coupling of those two things is what faith is for. Faith is about relationality. Faith is about a conduit of relationality that an individual has with a set of circumstances, with a set of shared values and of power and all of that stuff. So that's I think a little bit more of what the biblical or Bible's usage of something like faith is. And I think that what I hear Adrian emphasizing is the work of God in terms of the circumstances you find yourself in, so something happened that was outside of your control today that happened to foreground certain things for you, like say an extra paycheck or something like that, right? But there's also there has to be the simultaneous realization within the individual that thing is important and valuable in order for you to act accordingly, right? So something like that is what I'm hearing between the two of you.
I think what I'm getting at is that I know Christians who are, like Kevin says, who get off, the couch, they get off their butt, they work hard, they take initiative, they apply principles, and they see success in their life, and they believe in God. But those same people, if their principles failed them, then they're in fear and they think they're going to starve. That's what I'm talking about, is the people who think like they're reducing God to principles.
Are you talking about people who are Christians?
Yeah, people who are Christians, who they think that being godly is applying all these principles to your life. So let's say you apply the law of sowing and reaping, you work hard and you make a lot of money, and then something happens. If they lost all their money, they think they're going to starve. And it's like, well, what is your faith in God, or is your faith in God's principles? Do you think now that the principles fail you, or the fruit that you acquired from applying the principle, now that fruit is gone, you think you're going to starve? So am I making sense here?
Yeah. I think, are they practicing those principles without love? Are they giving,
I think to them, the principles are God.
Okay.
So I think if you were to lose all your money, you would still be in the situation where you need to look at your environment and figure out what you need to take responsibility for in that environment. Okay, now I have no money. What is mine to do right now?
I agree with that there is, if I were in that situation, there would be something that I needed to do to get out of that situation. But while simultaneously trying to discern what it is that I need to do, I also trust that I'm not going to starve in the midst of the situation. And so I'm talking about the person who would know that they need to take action, but they think that they're going to starve or they're going to go without if they don't take action, or if they don't take appropriate action. Where my thought process is both. Like, I need to take action, I need to do something, and I trust that God is going to provide while I'm trying to work my way out of and through this situation.
I wonder if they're ignoring what they can do. Are they like Jesus being tempted to jump off the roof of the temple? They say, "Oh, I'll just go ahead and jump," and they're going ahead and doing some financially irresponsible, maybe is the word for it, things, and maybe God wants them to walk in wisdom. That's one thing that comes to mind. Are they being deceived into foolishness by maybe being tempted to do something that sounds scriptural, biblical? Because, when the devil tempted Jesus to jump off the temple, he was quoting the Bible to him.
Yeah.
So I think there's that, because the Bible says God gives us the spirit of a sound mind.
You just really touched on something, Joe, because sometimes you see like Christians on social media who say, "Oh, God told me to quit my job and I went broke, but I kept my faith." And I think, it's like when, the devil told Jesus to jump off the cliff. And it's
Yeah.
just like, did God, like they see taking that extreme risk or that extreme measure as an act of faith.
Mm.
And
Or
there
did-
are sometimes, and I think that's part of the tension too, is that sometimes faith goes against reason, but sometimes people are making unreasonable decisions and calling it faith and crediting that decision to God.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what all of that has to do with what we were originally
Well,
talking about, but you
I
really,
like the definition of faith that James Fowler gives in his book in the stages of faith. And it's more of a, it's not, and in the book, The Religious Case Against Belief as well. It's not an affirmation of a certain set of propositions. It is committing yourself to the tension of all the other entities in life with which you have shared centers of value and power. It's, you have different things in your life, and one of those would be base reality. One of those would be God, both the God of the arena outside you and the God that is working in and through you in Philippians 2:12 and 13. And your relationship to that. And like, if I'm faithful to my wife, I'm not affirming propositions about her. I am conducting myself in a way that has fidelity to our level of commitment to each other. And so I don't think having faith is just an empty affirmation of a set of propositions, either about like ontology or about future ontology, what will be necessarily. But it's a dictator of how a person conducts themselves.
I'm going to share something and tell me what you think about it, about faith. And tell me if you think I'm wrong, but here's what I see faith is. It's understanding, basically, because, I have faith the sun is going to come up tomorrow, but that's based on past experience and what I know and understand about science, astronomy, and I see that faith is believing what the evidence tells me. And to me, it's not believing in spite of the evidence, because to me, that is the opposite of faith. That's kind of a disconnect with reality associated with mental illness. And that's one thing I hear. I think that's one thing skeptics or non-Christians say that give us a reason for not becoming a Christian, because they say, well, I can't have faith, I go by evidence. But to me, that is the definition of faith.
faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence
of things not seen. And the not seen aspect is based on, that's the future, but it's based on what you have seen in the past. Because I believe what I've not seen yet in the future, that the sun will come up tomorrow, on the basis of what I actually did see in the past, which was that the sun came up every day of my life so far.
Yeah, like a pretty good reason to infer.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of a simple idea of faith, but it just seems
I kind of I don't want to stop the discussion about faith, because I do think it's a very important one, and kind of toggling in my mind whether to just continue with this or, and I'm not, because I really wanted to hit on these the trauma issues, and part of me is like, I think maybe this discussion is kind of a you can dig out the symptoms of trauma in this discussion that we've all had.
Well, I had some thoughts on the discussion too, but this will be real short.
Go ahead.
It was about, does God bless or not bless? And I was just thinking about what we had discussed earlier. Where is it all one way or all the other way? Does God do everything or do we do everything? It's like two extreme positions. And I thought maybe it depends, because I was thinking about a Christian in the Bible. It says to grow, for the Christians to grow in grace and in the knowledge of God. And the other thing was 7 letters to the churches in Revelation. apparently they're written to Christians, but there were some things Christians need to do, or else, different things will happen. So it seems like even for a Christian, some things depend,
Well, I think this ties into the number 3 thing and the things that contribute to religious trauma, being trained to ignore and distrust our body's thoughts and instincts. And does God bless financially, or does God bless? Well, for every example you can think of a Christian being blessed in some way, you can also have an example of a Christian who is very much more or less cursed in the same domain. And then you could also think of a non-professing or a lost person who is more blessed than the Christian is. And so I don't know if you could establish with ontological certitude in an objective way that any particular blessing or lack thereof was because of somebody's interaction or relationship to or faith in or lack thereof of God.
Yep. It seems difficult.
I want to look at number 1, spiritual spaces that don't make space for disagreement or questions. I was in a church in 2000, 2002, pretty much, where about every May or June, somebody would get kicked out. They call it disfellowshipping or getting churched, is what they call it, getting churched in northern Georgia. I don't know if you've heard that, Adrian. Place called Antioch Baptist Church, pretty close to Augusta, Georgia. They call it getting churched, and it's kind of a thing that happens all the time. But one particular family who was more or less in compliance with all the behavioral requirements of the church, which were pretty steep, they decided that they weren't in agreement with premillennialism anymore, and they would no longer be welcome at the church. So they withdrew their membership because that was now their opinion. And to me, it's pretty asinine that you changing your opinion about something like that would force you to disfellowship with people. It doesn't even make sense to me. And I'm like, well, can't you believe one way or another and also still transform into somebody who can communicate better and who can have good faith discussions with somebody better and who can help afford transformation for other people better? Why do you have to have this particular belief in common?
Did this church have 2 Peter chapter 1 in their Bible? Because it's pretty
I didn't check them all.
Yeah, but it's pretty obvious that, Peter.
Yeah, I knew what my assumptions were there.
Yeah, we need to put virtue into our faith. We have to have temperance, patience.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
And, brotherly love and charity. And all these things are lacking in charity, in my opinion.
Charity is a good one too. So what does this do to a person? What does this do to a person who grows up in a church like that, where your entire social structure, and when that family left, and when every family left, when they left May or June, your entire social structure is the church. Everything you do is with those people. And when you get churched, you're done. You got nobody. You're out. See ya. And it's even split up families.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting to hear that if they get churched, then they lose their social structure. It's like, are you only associating with the people that go to your church?
So yes, in that particular church, yes. Now, I've learned better since then.
Oh,
I've learned better since then, but they'd only associate with people in the church. And then they would weaponize Romans 16, 17 through 19, mark them which cause divisions and avoid them. And so if you got churched and you saw other church members in the grocery store, they would turn around and walk the other way. They wouldn't even talk to you in public somewhere else. Standing in line beside them at the post office, they will act like you're not there. Good Christian love and charity there. You don't believe the rapture like I do.
It sounds like the people who are churching other people, they're the ones who need to be marked and avoided. It's like the opposite, like they're projecting or something.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think one thing I've noticed in my personal life is that when I didn't know how to be, or when I didn't know that as a Christian, I was supposed to be learning how to be, I was really obsessed with theology and really obsessed with doctrine and wanting to understand the Bible perfectly and being able to argue every stance and every position. And now that I'm more interested in what kind of person I'm supposed to become to, you know, imitate Christ and be an example, theology has become so boring to me.
That's so wow.
Yeah.
That's
And I
such a
was
microcosm of
obsessed.
everything.
I have something I want to spring.
What was that last sentence you said,
Go
Adrian?
ahead. Sorry
I
about
said
that.
I was obsessed with theology, and now I'm sick.
Yeah, it's not. You realize it's not effective to help you do or be better.
Yeah, it's not the goal. It's can help lead you towards the goal, but it's not the goal.
So I just want to interject really quick. Sorry, Jamie. Adrian, I have this self-proclaimed amazing interpretation, useful interpretation of the Disney movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
That I want to share with you at some point. It is all about that experience that you said you had with theology.
Wow.
All about it. Yeah, it's really to me, it's really profound. Yeah.
I got the expanded version in a car on a road trip one day. It was great. I highly recommend it.
Sorry, Jamie.
5 out of 5
okay.
would recommend.
What was the name of that?
The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Really?
You got to get it from Nick though. You got to do one of those Discord calls with him.
I'm working on getting a comprehensive presentation of it, because I think it's on my mind every single day, and it's something that I think I'll be ready to share like in a big way with you guys whenever I, whatever. So sorry, Jamie.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
Do you think that? Oh,
I had a few thoughts on some things I'm hearing from the group here. Is the word balance is screaming at me. We have to find balance in everything we do. I believe anyway, it's my perspective, but there's two scriptures that really came to mind. James chapter 2, verses 8. And if I feel if we do this, we're fulfilling the things that God wants us to do. So James chapter 2, verse 8 says, if ye fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, you do well. I just think that is our balance. If we can keep that at the forefront of our mind to love thy neighbor, fulfill that royal law, everything will be in balance. Then from there, I want to go to Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And this is 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. And it seems like this is a prerequisite to transforming. And
what verse did you say?
Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2.
Yep.
And I see here, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. So if I am fulfilling the royal law, loving thy neighbor, I am offering my body as a sacrifice to the body of Christ, and wholly acceptable unto God, which is our reasonable service. Now, if we bounce over to verse 2, and be not conformed, there's that formed, it's conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And I think these passages, and you asked the question, Kevin, about when two Christians comes together, what happens, or what, something like that. Well, they're fulfilling the royal law of love. They're coming together. They are offering themselves as a living sacrifice. And now when a group comes together, like we are here online, we're transforming just a little bit at a time. So
another way to say that, I mean, what popped into my head when you say be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed, I think it would be another way to say, but be conformed to God. It makes me think of a rain puddle or a mud puddle, how it perfectly conforms to the ground.
Yeah.
And now put that in motion and say you're instead of being stagnant, one thing that is perfectly conformed to something that's still, now make it a river, and you are an expert whitewater rafter, and you know how to move with the flow of God, and you can conform to it perfectly as you move.
Right. That's great
Transformed is
right there.
metamorphosis.
Verse 1, I see. I'm sorry about that, MJ. Go ahead.
I think transformed is metamorphosis, the Greek
Mhm.
word. I think
Yep.
one is passive. I think conformed, one is passive, one is active.
Mm.
And conformed is, I think it's an outward expression that doesn't reflect the reality.
Metamorpho, verb,
Yeah.
present, passive, imperative, second person, plural.
And when you went to was it Timothy 3:5, when he's talking about the form, I think it's a form of morphe as well. And I think it's all talking about outwards. So you've got in Romans, he's talking about there's an outward expression, but really it's a metamorphosis within, the transformation within. And with the context of Timothy, once again, he was talking about the false people, but they were given an outward expression, but inwardly they were corrupt. And so that's like a contrast. You contrast in Romans with the right way of doing it, which is you've got an inward metamorphosis, which is generating something positive to counteract with the outward side. And with Timothy, that's the emphasis. The emphasis is what's going on within. It's not how the person appears outwardly.
Mm.
What passage was that in Timothy again?
3:5 was it second? Joe mentioned it. I think it was 2 Timothy 3:5.
2 Timothy 3:5. Yep. So there, the word is morphosis. Yep. And then
I wanna
transform is
comment.
metamorphosis. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to comment on what Jamie said, and I actually have a question for you guys. So the word balance triggers me because I feel like sometimes I see what you're saying with the word balance, that there's a lot of conversation that we've said tonight of it's either this or that, and you're trying to reconcile it with the concept of balance. But to me, when I think of balance, I think of 50-50. And I think that things are not necessarily 50-50. And that takes my mind to Ecclesiastes 3, where it says there's a time for everything, a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to kill, a time to heal. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
So
and
like an
Right.
appropriate ratio for the scenario.
Yeah, I don't think
Right.
the reconciliation is balance. I think the reconciliation is discernment, knowing what's appropriate for the given situation that you're in. And I don't know. And I also, when I think of the word balance, I think of yin and yang. And I also think of fairness, and people want everything to be even Steven. And I just feel like that's not realistic. Like life is not fair. I always say like life's not fair, but God is just. And so I don't think we reconcile the dichotomy with balance, but with discernment and knowing which thing of the this or that is appropriate.
I'd like to add something to what Adrian said, that, what I hear is it's not always either one extreme or the opposite extreme, and it's not necessarily the halfway point either. And it's not necessarily always the 2/3 point towards one side, but to make it appropriate, it depends. And so
Like there isn't a rule book you can follow. It just depends on whether or not there's, say,
Right.
a zombie apocalypse.
and
That
it may
would
be
dictate
and
whether or not you steal the motorhome or cut someone's arm off.
And the temptation could be to look for a rule to tell me what to do instead of I actually think. And to think might be something that requires a little confidence too, that I believe I can make the right decision. But one thing Nick mentioned about Alfred North Whitehead comes to mind. Alfred North Whitehead worked with another guy, Bertrand Russell, to co-author a massive work trying to derive mathematics from pure logic. And the other co-author of that, Bertrand Russell, one thing he's known for saying is that there's one thing that people fear more than death. And you know what that is?
Speaking in public?
Thinking. That's what
That's right.
Bertrand
That's
Russell
right.
said.
That's right.
They fear thought more than death. So I think that's interesting. And he supposedly was an atheist, Bertrand Russell. But that's
Whitehead
what's
was not, yeah.
Yeah, I think if he's right, that people have an aversion to thinking, and then that could partially explain why there's a tendency to gravitate towards a rule book, an ideology, propositions, one extreme or the other. Yeah, that's it.
Can I throw something into the mix?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's all great conversation. Back to the money and being churched. Kevin, if you can pull
Get us
up
back on track, Billy.
Pull up Revelations 3:17.
Revelations or Revelation?
I'm sorry. I really fumbled there. That was a false presupposition I had in the past. Revelations. No, it's Revelation. 3:17. And I'm gonna throw a question at everybody. Okay. So hopefully this is thought provoking. So we're talking about people being prospered. Now Jesus is talking to the church in Revelation 3:17. He says, because thou sayest, I am rich and increased with goods, and have the need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Now that's an interesting saying by Christ himself, because it's like we're in a prosperity gospel today, and it's like, who increased them with goods is my question. Because if they're the church, they think that God is prospering. Maybe he is, though. I mean, with all this stuff, but at the same time, he's saying, look what's happening, man. You got all this stuff and you think you're in need of nothing. And there's so much more. And here's where I'm going with this. There's so much more in your Christian life that you better be aware of than wanting to have money. And I'm not saying that we don't need money. So we need that balance, right? Because there we go. We got to have that balance. But that's a very interesting, saying there. I'm just curious, what do you think on that? I'm just throwing it out there. It just came to my mind because we're all talking about this stuff, and I'm thinking, where do you get the balance? Because I know God prospers people, but at the same time, it's much deeper than that, our Christian walk. It's much deeper.
The first thing that pops into my head is that it's easy to use this verse to weaponize against any religious organization that happens to be financially stable. Whereas just because somebody is like a church is financially stable, in my opinion, does not necessarily mean that they are spiritually poor. So I'm trying to think of
It's just a thought provoker,
No, it is.
I agree with what Kevin just said, but I think sometimes, we don't want to villainize financial wellness. I don't want to do that, but I do feel like sometimes people treat that as an indicator, and
halo effect.
Say that again?
The halo effect. If
Correct.
they see you good in one area, like maybe you're handsome or pretty, or you have money or a nice house, then they think that they spread that out to all other areas of your life and think that you're a wonderful person in all domains.
Right. And I think that it can be an indication if someone's doing well in that area. They could be doing well in other areas, but then to Billy's point, it could also be a Revelation 3:17 situation where externally, by outward appearances, you're rich and you're prosperous, but God is looking on your heart and saying you're poor, you're blind, you're naked. And so I think we don't want to villainize it, and it can be an indicator, but it's not necessarily an indicator. And I think it requires discernment and insight, spiritual insight, to look at a person or look at an establishment and not be swayed by the outward appearance.
I think a couple of things. Billy's comments reminded me of when I was in Africa a few months back, and some of the Christians out there, third world country, they got nothing. But I was like in awe of how happy and content they were. And I mean, they had some of these people have nothing, absolutely nothing. But you talk to them, and they're happier than 90% of the Christians that I've met out here. So I think that's the flip side of that. But wanted to bring back when you're talking about trauma in the church. It reminds me of anytime I've talked to a really militant kind of atheist, right, or somebody that says they don't believe in God. Usually after a little bit of time talking to them, it's not that I don't get the sense that they truly don't believe there's a God, but there's an anger, or they're mad at God for something. So I think what you're talking about in the church happens across the board, because I've yet to really have a conversation with somebody that I feel truly doesn't believe there's a God. It's usually you start talking to them and something happened,
Oh, I think we lost Joe C.
I think I could answer. What happens is they say, there is no God and I hate him.
that don't believe.
Yeah, we lost you for a second, Joe C. I think we lost you again.
Yeah.
Wow. I think that yeah.
So I think Joe's comments actually go all the way back to Billy's first comment about presuppositions. Is that what's the funny thing is that conversation with an atheist is chock full of presupposition on their end and yours.
Yes.
Because you have a presupposition about the God that they're supposed to be denying or believing in or resentful towards. And if you're not aware of that presupposition, then you can't investigate and discover the presupposition that they're holding that is causing them the conclusion of atheism, right? So it's almost like Billy was sort of saying, is if you can be aware, if you can search deeper down into your own assumptions about God, then that will open the possibility space for you to understand the roots of where the atheistic conclusion has a bad presupposition, right? So their bad presupposition about God might be like some kind of moralist, like God is moralism or something like that, God does arbitrary things and like evil things in Leviticus or something like that, and so they're holding a bad presupposition about God, and the way to relate, or the way to relate to them, is to be aware of your own, so that your presuppositions aren't limiting, right, the possibility, the possibility space in what they hold, because Romans 1 states very clearly that everybody knows God to a degree.
I think one of the problems with atheists and propositional Christians, that they share in common a false model of God. And the Christians they're arguing with are wrong for holding that model, and the atheists are correct for disbelieving that model, but wrong for throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Hey, a light went on, Nick, when you were talking. You and Kevin, if you can find out what has persuaded a person to think what they think about what I just said. If you can find out what persuaded a person to think what they think, that's a way to get into the conversation.
That's the toughest question ever. You know, I don't know if you saw the videos series on the Dragon of Calvinism, but there are so many reasons other than the facts for why people think what they think.
You're right. I mean, I kind of simplified it in my mind. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, boy, if you can get in there,
But
into
the
it.
problem is that they don't know. If I ask somebody like, why are you an atheist? They will say, well, I believe in science. But like Joe C said earlier, or to sum it up as the way Ruckman says what Joe C said is they don't disbelieve in God. They're upset that they had a bad life. That's what now I'm not saying that I buy into that assessment of it, but something something like that. They don't know why. So, and to put it another way, the goal of cognitive science is to discover the mechanisms of self-deception and try to find out how to put an end to them. So by the time a person shows up and says, this is what I believe and here's why I believe it, that is not why they believe it. But they don't know that. And it took, it would take an earnest person a while to figure out that the reason I believe the things that I believe isn't why I think I do. It's for other reasons. And then you find those out and then you start to let go of things. So it's finding the answer to that question is a lot different than asking them, in my opinion, because they don't know. They don't know.
Before my internet cuts out again, I do find a lot of times it's based on how they view Christians or interactions they've had with people that claim to be Christians. And and a lot of times it's like, okay, you can't, you got to separate Jesus from these people, Christians, or how you kind of view the general perception of Christians. And
absolutely,
right? They just really they won't get close to church or Bible, and God because of they don't want to be like how they view Christians.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I share the atheist distaste of Christians. Not, you know what I mean? I hope you know what I mean. Not you guys.
Well,
not most of you anyway.
Well, just take an atheist to Revelations 3:17 and say, look what's going to happen. I mean, a good spanking's coming. I mean, it's like,
yeah, and I see along that line, I see the Bible or Jesus talking about varying degrees of rewards and varying degrees of punishments too. So it doesn't seem to be an all or none proposition.
So Seraphim says that atheism is a necessary stage in the development of mature faith. And I kind of thought the same thing. I have friends that are atheists, and I basically perceive them to be going through a phase, and that is the proper response of an immature mind to the realization of the arbitrariness of the propositional God. Something like that. And they should grow out of it over time. Maybe Richard Dawkins didn't, but we're over time. We're about 8:34 right now. How do y'all feel about continuing this conversation next? No, Peter W., we are Christians. I'm talking to somebody in the comments here. This guy says, are these guys not Christians? No, we are Christians. Yeah. What we're talking about is propositional Christianity, like the typical Christian in America, not somebody who's actually following Christ. How do y'all feel about continuing this discussion about 6 things that contribute to religious trauma next week? I don't feel like we delved into this as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, I got a couple more things on some of them that I definitely want to throw out on the table for you guys.
Yeah. So in the meantime, what I'd like you to do between tonight and next Wednesday is think about each one of those 6 things, because they're in the email that got sent out. And maybe there's a story that you know of in your own life that it demonstrates that particular issue, and we could discuss those.
Yo, is Adrian on Discord?
I'm going to send her an invite.
Okay.
She wasn't here when we started the Discord thing, so I've been adding people as we see them here.
Mhm.
Yeah, I need to hear about the hunchback story.
Yeah, Quasimodo is where it's at. Trust me.
All right. Any final comments? Anybody just got to get out before we wrap it up for tonight?
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I would
Yes,
like
indeed.
to tie the trauma in with what we're doing with Ephesians 5.
Okay. Yeah.
Especially like they're doing like 1 and 2, 5, 1 and 2, talking about walking in love. And I think Russ made an important statement a few weeks back where he said that he thought that Ephesians 5 was part of the Paul's program to get us actually into Ephesians 4. So
Wow. Yeah.
I think it's Ephesians 5 and 6, because I think with all this discussion, we've totally eliminated the main problem, which is Lucifer and how he works, and a lot of the influences that he has within the church system. And that's what Paul's emphasis is in Ephesians as well. So if we could tie that all together, I think it would make a sandwich.
Make a sound. You're making me hungry. Yeah, so let's tie that in next week and continue this discussion. I feel like there's a lot more that can be unfolded here and unpacked here. Well, this flew by. I thought tonight was great. I appreciate everybody coming and speaking up. This is you guys showing up, making it wonderful.
Sorry. I didn't mention Joe C. If you're interested in the Discord, probably just send Kevin an email.
Yeah. Send me, if you're not in the Discord, because I can't think of who off the top of my head has gotten it or not. If you're not in the Discord, shoot me an email, and I will send you an invite.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Next week, yeah. Peace out.